Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the channel. What if I told you that knight endgames are some of the most dangerous, confusing, and tactical endgames in all of chess? Yesterday, I published a video on bishop endgames, and they were incredibly difficult as I played against the engine for some of the video before going on to explain some of the basics. Knight endgames are even worse. One wrong move, and suddenly your knight is trapped, or your pawns are falling, and the position just completely falls apart. Even grandmasters have fallen into the problem where they've just moved their knight the wrong way. They are incredibly difficult to play. In this video, I'm going to try and cover a few different things. King activity, which is important in every endgame. Knight outposts, pass pawns, calculation tricks, domination, zugzwang, and common mistakes that you'll make in knight endgames. By the end of this video, you should hopefully understand the core principles strong players use to win knight endgames consistently. But let's first talk, and let's begin with why knight endgames are so unique. Knight endgames are very different from rook or even bishop endgames. Why? Knights are slow pieces. A bishop can move across the board instantly, so can a rook. It controls files and ranks from far away. But knights, they need time to get everywhere. That means that the tempo, your tempo matters. So, how everything is done if you can get a tempo move. Pawn structure matters, and precise calculation becomes extremely important. Knights are also tricky because they are short-range tactical pieces. Even in quiet endgames, forks are always hiding everywhere. I'm gonna, if I ever get merchandise, I'm gonna get a shirt made or something that says, if you have a horse, you're not lost, or something like that. You're not lost as long as you have a horse. Like, I'm sure I can find a clip on the channel, or you can find one, like on a live stream, where I was completely lost, but I had a knight. And when you have a knight, you can win games because you can find a fork, specifically in low time. You can find a fork. One careless king move can lose you the game instantly. Another important point, knights in any position are amazing blockaders. Amazing at blockading pass pawns. A knight sitting in front of a pass pawn can completely stop it. It can't move. That's why knight endgames are often becomes battles of maneuvering and patience. You've got to activate the king. Remember, a centralized king means your knight is even stronger because it can bounce off the king. You've got to try and bring your king toward the center. You've got to attack weak pawns. You've got to support pass pawns. And you've got to restrict the opponent's king. Now, moving on to knight outposts. You've probably heard the phrase, a knight on the rim is dim. It's kind of true. But if you can find a really good outpost, an outpost being a square where a knight can easily sit and not be attacked by enemy pawns or even other pieces sometimes, then it's really good. A knight outpost can attack multiple targets, can blockade pawns, it can control important entry squares if you've got a huge pawn chain or something and you're blockading the king from getting into your position, and it creates tactical threats. If you can find some really strong outposts, that'll be amazing. And then, a knight on the rim is dim. It can be because knights on the edge of the board can get trapped, particularly if you put them in the corner. So we'll go to an example quickly. Wrong one. So the first one I have here for you is just a winning endgame for white because it's simple. Black is forced to go here, and white checkmates. So even though it looks like black promotes, if you can force the king into the corner, you can still checkmate with a knight versus a pawn. We'll talk about how that is often a draw later. But if we go to a new analysis, you have to be so careful when playing, because if you stick your knight in the corner, it can get trapped. If the king gets here, your knight's trapped. Unless you've got the white king on one of these like two squares to help support it get out, it's just trapped. So if, for example, let's get rid of this king, put this king on the other side of the board, and now give black just a pass pawn. Just a pass pawn here. Completely winning. Completely winning. Because the knight is stuck and the pawn will promote. You can't chase the pawn, so you would need your knight. But, the black king somehow got here and trapped your knight on the side of the board. Knight can't get out. And it's really difficult. Even if it's higher up on the board, even if it's like higher up and it's here, it still only has so many squares to come out. And that's why if you had a bishop here, it cuts so many squares. So we put the king here, we put the king here. You might think draw. No, black is winning because the knight can't re-enter the game. It is completely controlled by the bishop. So you've got to be so careful putting knights on the edges of the board. A bishop in general, 3 squares away from a knight, controls it going forwards. But, knights have the ability to go backwards, not if they're on the edge of the board. So you've got to be so careful with your knights not to get them stuck. And that's why going into the corner and going to the edge of the board is not great. There was a recent knight endgame played in Taipei, which Magnus Carlsen won, where someone had a knight endgame and they got their knight trapped, and this was a grandmaster. So you've got to be so careful. Passed pawns in knight endgames, they can be really, really dangerous, particularly if the knight can't catch them. You've got to be so careful to calculate. Often, if the pawn is really quick, you might need a check or a tempo move, as we discussed earlier, to try and catch them. But you've got to be so careful. Passed pawns are extremely dangerous. And knights are really, really bad at stopping distant passed pawns. So, outside passed pawns, which are a common concept in endgames, you need to be able to stop them. And that's just it. And maneuvering your knights. Like, if we go back to the analysis board, let me just go back to the analysis board. Wrong one again. If we go back to the analysis board, maneuvering your knight can take some time. So if we set up a pawn structure, all right, and we're going to be targeting these 2 pawns, but our knight is like here. Where can we go? Black king is, over here. Our white king is here. Obviously, maybe black's not going to do this because it loses the pawn, right? And they've got their knight somewhere trapped over here. Probably this is winning. I think at the moment it's not. I think for some reason it's winning because black is up a pawn. But if it's not, like, to maneuver your knight to get to these 2 pawns takes like you 2 moves. Of course, this would be a great outpost, but that requires you to be able to defend this. Black is very quick. 1 move, and they're hitting this pawn. So you can get here, which is a draw now, because it's the white to move. So if we go back, not king eats his horse. If we go back and load this position, oh, the king's in check, that's why I can't load it. If we go here, this is a draw. So we load this position. We can play, the engine wants knight f5, check, which looks strange. Why does it? Oh, because king takes f5 and you take the second pawn, it's a draw. But if, for example, we wanted to go with our idea, right, going here to target these 2 pawns, black is very quick, either knight c6 or knight d7, and they're hitting our base. So if we get here, going to take this, and now they're defending that. So we can't get there. We wanted to get here, if I'm not mistaken. So, it takes some time, and we're going to come back, and now we're losing very quickly, because, f5. What? Yeah, f5. And now you're going to try and chase these pawns, and it's losing. So you've got to be very, very careful. Difficult. See, my dog is snacking behind me. Hello, Marty. How are you? You're very good. You're listening to Knight Endgames. Okay. Because you're just a galloping stallion. Anyway. So Knight Endgames are incredibly, incredibly complex. So, there's a few practical examples you can work through. One thing I would suggest that you go do is you go onto chess.com or onto Lichess or your preferred chess platform. You go to minor pieces and you begin to practice Knight Endgames. So, if we load up a drill here, and let me make sure I click the right scene. Here we are. We've got this Knight Endgame. So we can start it. It's white to move. And here again, knights can be incredibly difficult, because if the king can't catch the pawn, can be very difficult at stopping pawn promotions. So this just wins because we queen. And now it's just about not allowing ourselves to get forked. So this becomes really difficult. But there's this check, and you can eventually pry away the defense of the knight. So let's just go here. Eventually, you will be able to pry away the king from the defense of his horse. Check here. Again, we're forcing the king towards the edge of the board. And now let's just give him a check. And you can see now we're getting closer. We're just not going to allow anyone to blunder. We pin the knight. Okay, now he's come really close. Knights are great defenders of the king, though, by the way. So you definitely don't resign if you're down here. Check. And now we can bring the king closer. And now the knight comes closer. And you got to be careful not to blunder like a stalemate or something. And oh, look at that. I nearly went here and would have cried tears of sadness. Check. Now it can come really close. Gives me this check. And it's really difficult. I'm actually really worried I may not win this. I'm trying to remember the correct way to do this, but it's not coming to me. Okay, so you can see, half of me just wants to sack the queen and be done with it. But we're eventually going to force the king backwards, and he's going to start running out of moves. Already, here, I'm thinking, get this check, get in nice and close. Don't blunder anything, this is check. But now we can come here, check again. And he can't run too far away, because now I'm going to start getting his king. Check. And check, and there we go. The knight ran too far away from the king, and now I'm completely winning, and we're going to win this endgame. Get the king to the edge of the board, and we checkmate. And here we go. This is where we were talking about practical endgame. You can see white has a 2-on-1 on both sides of the board. The one thing you don't want to do is go there and hang your knight. This looks tempting. Just putting our knights on a very nice strong outpost. We could also go here to prevent the mobility of this pawn via en passant. But also just here could be nice. Here to centralize the knight, also creating the pass pawn. We want to control what their knight does. So their knight's looking to go into one of these two places. I think the first thing I'm going to do is go here. Get this trade. So now we have a clean pass pawn. And now while the knight and the king try to defend this, the king can see starts to go this way. We're protecting this. And then if the king ever gets too close, we'll, give a check or something and try to pick this pawn up. So what we're going to do in the meantime is try to bring our guy closer. I can already give this check. And now take this with check. And now we got to be careful. And it's a draw. Because he sacks the knight for the pawn. Tough one, and it's a draw by insufficient material. Let's just run through that back real quick. So we traded here. And now what we did is we let the knight get really close. What I should have done is maybe push this pawn, bring the king closer. Because what happens here is the king is able to win both my pawns. And the knight sacrifices for the one remaining pawn that I had. And you can't checkmate with a horse, unfortunately. Horses are great at getting you checks and back into the game. But unfortunately, you're just not going to win all of them. And so that's why it is important to practice knight endgames. So go onto chess.com, go onto Lichess, go onto any other training platform that you have, and practice knight endgames. They are really, really challenging. Just in terms of some final thoughts, some final tips, some final opinions on knight endgames, master some knight endgame techniques, calculate pawn races. So if you've got two pawns racing down the board in calculation, knight endgames often come down to calculation battles. You can see I didn't calculate properly there, especially when there's pawn races involved. That's when two pawns are racing up and down the board. You must constantly calculate who queens first, whether the knight can stop the pawn, and whether checks or forks exist at the end. A funny trap or something that happens in drawn positions, if we go and we get an analysis board up real quick, is there's often points which are really funny, where you can allow them to promote. So if we set up a position, and we get black here, and they pawn here, that becomes a queen. But knight can go here, and the king is here. This is a draw, simply because in this position, black has just played the move queens, and we now give the check, king comes, and we take the queen, and the game ends in a draw. So things like that exist. So you've got to be so careful and get it in the right way. I remember one of my first tournament games, I was going to promote, and I was so happy, but there existed like a knight fork at the end, because my king was here, my pawn was here, and there existed this knight fork at the end, which hits the king and the queen at the same time. So it was really upsetting. So you've got to be aware of that. Clicked on the wrong thing. So, just to show you, because the screen went black, black just played the move pawn g1 queen, and white follows up with check and picks up the queen. Instant draw between the two teams. And so this is very sad. As I was mentioning, there was a tournament game, my first tournament game, where I could have promoted here, but my king was on f2, and there existed this move, knight to d6, which hit the queen and the king, and I would have lost the queen, and ultimately did lose that game. So very interesting. Knight endgames are very interesting, very complex, very detailed and depth. So knight fork tricks always in the endgame. You're never lost when you have a horse, unless you only have a horse. Zugzwang in knight endgames, they exist. If you can find a way to force them to move, they're great. Knights are great for that. And then domination, restricting the knight. If you cannot allow the knight to move, or like you saw in the drill I did where I forced it away from the king, if you can really control the knight and restrict where it can go, you're going to be very, very successful if you're playing knight versus knight. And so common knight endgame mistakes: if your king is too passive, if you push the pawns too quickly, if you're ignoring forks and you're not constantly looking for them, like whenever that knight moves, check for forks. If you're placing your knight on bad squares and you're playing too quickly, you got to calculate all the way through. So practice your knight endgames, go do drills, some practical examples, but this is what you got to know about knight endgames, ladies and gentlemen. Let me know if you enjoyed the video, if it is going to be helpful to you for knight endgames, if you want more examples or something like that, if you think it's beneficial, let me know. If you think it's not, tell me what I can improve. Tell me what you want to see in the videos like this that I do. Anyway, cheers.